Okay, so today we're doing something a little bit different. We asked Verity from Versoft Consulting to come and talk to us about some systems and what it might look like to evaluate current systems, and just kind of have an expert here that can talk more to the SEC marketing rule and how it integrates with your performance system or your composite management system. We also are going to talk about Q&As. A lot of you sent in some great Q&As when we asked on the registration form. So we do have a section at the end to discuss that. And for those of you that don't know me, my name is Janice Kitzman. I'm a partner here at Cascade Compliance. Cascade's been around for about 5 years now, 5.5. And we focus mainly on SEC marketing rule consulting, GIPS verifications, and performance reviews. Verity is the CEO and principal consultant at Versoft. They are a technology consulting firm, and she can tell you a little bit more when she's up here in a second. So the first thing that we just want to establish before we jump into anything else is we want to provide you all with kind of this executive summary of the SEC marketing rule and those requirements just to set the stage. I know most of you know what these are, but again, it doesn't help to have a little bit of a refresher. So just a reminder, the marketing rule is all about, sorry, that got switched. The marketing rule is really about how you're presenting things to your prospective clients. And some people are getting a little bit mixed up about whether or not this has to do with current clients, and it doesn't. It has to do with prospective clients. A current client can become a prospective client for a strategy that they're not currently invested in. So that is possible, but just keep that in mind as you're looking at who you're giving presentations to. The SEC marketing rule requires 1, 5, and 10-year performance or since inception if 10 years is not available. And this is for composite net returns, net fee performance. And it needs to reflect the relevant fee for the prospective client. And this has been difficult for some firms as they've been presenting actual performance, perhaps. And due to different fee structures, the actual performance being shown is not necessarily representative of what the prospective client could expect to receive, because they've got like a really large institutional account that, let's say, pays 40 basis points and they're marketing, a composite or a net of fee that's going to be 1%. And that composite net of fee return may not be reflective. So that's something that a lot of firms have been evaluating, and a lot have been switching to net of model fees. So we'll have a little bit about that. I know we continue to talk about it, but it's because it continues to come up. And then the performance of all related accounts being provided in similar investment policies, objectives, and strategies. So again, going back to that composite performance. We've gotten a lot of questions about equity-only returns or carve-out returns. And so if they are being presented, the presentation must include new requirements for either extracted performance, if it's a single account, or hypothetical performance, if the returns are extracted from multiple portfolios. So lots of nuances, lots of challenges, and we just want to continue the conversation. One thing I do want to put out there, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. That's open for you. You can also, at the end, we'll have time for Q&A. So we're not afraid to stop and answer a question here or there. We want this to be more interactive than it is just boring and you staring at slides, listening to us talk. So please feel free to hop in. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Verity.
Thank you. So real quick, Verity Larsen, CEO at Versoft, and as technology consultants, we of course focus here on the investment management industry. So we work with asset managers, wealth managers, family offices, even a few broker dealers here and there, but really cover the whole gamut as far as the RIA space. Thanks, Janice, for including us on the session today. Really, we wanted to just cover a little bit more in detail on the actual technology platforms that either support the 2022 SEC marketing rule, or even those that may be lacking, and what to do if there are gaps with your technology systems. And then even touch a little bit on maybe you're even shopping around looking for new technology, and just making sure that you know whether or not the platforms you are looking at will actually support and be compliant with performance reporting. So with that, I guess we'll go to the next slide. And so to talk a little bit today, so really want to start by talking about evaluating your current systems. So with whatever platform it is you're using today, which I know we did ask some polling questions. I guess we'll share some of those later. But there's definitely some things to be looking at. One of the key feature sets that I think has been really interesting is as technology has advanced over the years, and by the way, I've been in the industry about a little over 23 years, has been seeing how technology has changed in the area of this ability to actually lock down your performance. This used to be standard practice in just about every platform that existed 20 plus years ago, maybe even 10 years ago. But really, as new platforms have been surfacing over the last, say 10 to 12 years, this ability really doesn't exist. And I think that is just, if anything, is something to be aware of. May not prevent you from using that system. You may already be using systems that don't have this capability, but at least being aware of this challenge, so that you make sure that when you are managing your transactions, considering the booking of dividend accruals, and any adjustments that may be made post period. What does that look like, and how might it actually affect the recalculation of performance, because so many systems now are just reporting performance on the fly. So there are certain systems that will actually allow you to, in one case, lock down transactions so that you can no longer edit transactions after a certain time period. Or secondly, even lock down performance so that performance cannot actually be changed. Even if transactions change, performance doesn't actually change. It really holds that, as of a point of time. So as examples, some of the systems that do actually allow kind of this locking down of performance, there of course are honestly a lot of older systems. So you're looking at things like from the Advent world. So Advent software has like Axis, APX, and Geneva. And all of those systems do have that capability. But then you also have InData, which also has been in the world for about 20 plus years and is a big competitor of Advent. A lot of similar capabilities. FinFolio is actually a newer platform that has been kind of working its way into the market space for probably 5 or so years, and gaining more traction. But then you also have systems like Adapar, Black Diamond, Advise-On, list kind of goes on and on, Clearwater, etc., where they don't have that capability. So just be aware of what your system is allowing you, control of. And if transactions change, understand that performance calculation, where it's on the fly, it's not actually stored performance, will actually be changed. Next is the actual inclusion of composite capability. So also a lot of platforms don't actually support composites. And so again, there's a number of platforms out there. Advent capability, Advent does have them. InData, Portia, Tamarack, Orion, FinFolio, Clearwater, Aloha. The list kind of goes on and on. There's actually a lot of platforms that do support composites, but again, there's others that don't. I know I already mentioned things like Adapar or Black Diamond. Those really are more reporting-based systems, not geared towards where that portfolio, kind of management with composite capabilities. And so in that case, you may actually have to consider, other solutions, which we'll get to shortly. But then next, of course, is the ease of maintaining those composites. There are some of these platforms that I just mentioned where they actually have very robust, almost like rules-based engines that will support automatically maintaining the composites. So based on your criteria that defines, either a market value threshold or something like that, it can actually either enter or exit members from those composites based off of the criteria that you set up. Not all systems have that, but I can tell you that that is, of course, a real value add, especially if you're seeing that you're spending a lot of time on maintaining the accuracy of your composites membership. And then, of course, reporting capabilities, right? This is really where it gets into the marketing rule that Janice just did an overview of. So which system can actually generate the necessary reports and extracts that you need for meeting these rules. So we're looking at, the 1, 5, 10-year output, and as well as like the net versus gross, where historically a lot of people had reported gross performance and now you only can do net. So understanding what systems actually support gross versus net output, as well as have the different time periods that are easily able to report. So as an example, for a user of Axis, which I do know we have some people that are users of this and have been users probably since the 90s. Axis does not have standard reports that support, the 1, 5, 10 year. They can do 1 year. They could do, they can do it with a set date, a predefined date, but that means that you run the report today for a 5-year number. Next month, when you run it, you have to know what 5 years ago, what that date was. There's not just a setting to check that says, give me a 5-year number. However, there's other platforms out there, InData, Clearwater, honestly, even Adapar, Black Diamond, while they don't have composite capabilities, their reporting capabilities are a lot broader and very robust, really giving you control to kind of dissect your data and easily report on it. So just kind of knowing what system capabilities you have will allow you to better understand, how you're going to be able to meet these SEC requirements. Next, what do you do if there are gaps? You find that you don't actually have certain capabilities here. What are you going to do? So just a couple, options that I wrote down here. There can be a lot more larger concerns that may even come up, but these were two that I thought was most relevant. So number one, there are third-party solutions that are available for you to integrate with your current software. So really, no matter what platform you use for your portfolio accounting or portfolio management, there are tools out there that can manage your performance calculations as well as composite management. Some of those systems can include even just like straight up composite systems are like CAPS, Composite Builder, Opturo has a cool platform, and Informa, just to name a few. And then, if you also have certain issues with different types of assets or the way that they're being, that performance is calculated for certain types of assets. For example, if you have alternatives, that can be where, there's a gap in coverage because performance is not calculated accurately for your alternative investments. There, of course, are, again, either additional software you can add on, or you might consider, actually having to move to something else. But before we do that, the other option too is custom reporting. And while we don't always like to think that we have to do a lot of customization or pay a lot of money to make the software that we have work for us, in this case, it may actually be the best option for you. So to consider creating a custom report that will actually support this, this SEC marketing rule that will allow you to get the returns that you need for the proper time periods out of your current system. So your system likely can generate said returns, but it's just a matter of getting those out in the proper time frame or format. And then I guess lastly, we'll talk here about the considerations when you are changing platforms. So as you know, technology consultants, a lot of people have definitely been shopping the market. You know, they've been on technology for sometimes decades, and they're looking for a possible change. So I would encourage all of you to kind of go back to what I originally started by talking about when you're evaluating your systems, looking at what its capabilities are, and making sure that they check all the boxes when it comes to, you know, performance, return options, reporting options, composite supportability. But on top of that, I wanted to mention these other couple things, which is one, how is performance going to get converted if you're changing to a new system? So you obviously are going to want to take your prior performance returns out of your current system and get those ported over into the new system. But I would caution you to make sure that you talk with the vendors and understand what they can actually support in that conversion. Just to give you a heads up, there are certain vendors that will only allow conversion of either net or gross. They can't actually convert both. So be aware of that. That to me is, I mean, that's actually come up like mid-project at times when I've been working with people. And had they known, they may not have even chose that said platform. So know what you're getting into. There are also certain vendors out there that will only allow the conversion of total account level performance. But if you also are typically reporting out asset class or some other segment, some other type of classification level, they are not able to convert that data either. So knowing, again, what data you're trying to maintain, that you need to maintain, and want to also be continuing to report not just to clients, but also for marketing presentations. Make sure that you're actually able to take that necessary data into your new system and actually use their reporting capabilities for that. And then the last point really is about the type of performance calculation, more specifically to alternatives. So there's a lot of you know, asset managers, wealth managers, advisors really getting into this space where they're looking at more investments in alternatives or alts data. So you're talking about private equity, hedge funds, you know, limited partnerships, you know, real estate, the list kind of goes on and on. And that market is definitely growing. However, when you are doing performance returns on alternatives, you cannot do a time-weighted return or a total return. It's just not an accurate reflection of that investment. So make sure that the systems that you are looking at can actually use proper IRR calculations for alternative investments, and actually able to kind of segregate and do proper calculation even of rolled up total account, that it may include both alts and your typical marketable assets like, you know, bonds and equities. So those are just just kind of a few things to talk about, things to consider. You know, there's a lot of platforms out there, you know, so I think just being aware that you're doing your due diligence to understand either what your current system's capable of, and I'd even add, maybe you thought that there were limitations with your software depending on what platform you're on, but understand that in most cases, software providers are actually updating their software and providing releases and enhancements on a regular basis. So maybe it wasn't available 5 years ago, and yet with an update that you automatically received a couple years ago, you don't even realize that this feature set is actually available to you. So I would encourage you to also just do your due diligence and go out there and understand and get more information on the current capabilities of your system and whether new features have been added that will actually help support kind of these changing business needs. So I think that's about all I have. And I'm open to any questions, or we can address things later. You're on mute, Janice.
Somebody was gonna flub it at least once today.
Of course.
So I'm curious, when we talk about performance calculations for alternatives, do you know of any current systems that are doing this on a systems basis? Because honestly, in the world that I live in, most of it's done in Excel. I really haven't seen a lot of systems do this. So
Yep.
What's been your experience there?
Yeah, fortunately, a lot of the platforms that have really come out in like the last 10 years are doing proper IRR calculation of alts. So you're looking at, unfortunately, these are systems too, though, that may not have composite capabilities, which adds a layer of challenge. But, Adapar, Black Diamond, Advise-On, they certainly calculate the proper IRR. But there are other systems out there, InData, Clearwater, Aloha, that are doing proper IRR capabilities, and they also have composite management functionality.
Okay.
So they do exist, but certainly not everybody. And that's definitely a challenge. I would add actually APX, Advent Portfolio Exchange, can kind of do it. So, but it does again kind of come down to some custom reporting. So it's like the system can do it, but it doesn't have kind of out of the box, functionality.
Right. All right, great. Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, and if anyone has questions, wants to unmute themselves, they can, or again, you can put that in the chat if you don't want to unmute yourself. So if we have no questions, we'll move on to the Q&A. And if we finish early, y'all get some time back in your lives today. So just some Q&A that we found that we've been getting a lot of questions about here at Cascade. And one of them is ETFs as benchmarks. As most of you know, you've probably gotten a bill from your benchmark provider that had a significant increase. And so advisors are looking for ways to decrease cost. And one of the ways that they're looking to do that is getting rid of some of the more prominent benchmarks that cost a lot of money to show every year. So we keep getting this question, well, what about ETFs as benchmarks? And I think one of the things I want to say is, so yes, we look at things from both an SEC marketing rule perspective and a GIPS perspective. The SEC marketing rule mentions GIPS, I don't know, 26 times or something like that in the adopting release. And so what that told us is that the GIPS standards are a foundation and a resource for advisors to rely on and to kind of help them know how to maybe appropriately comply with the SEC marketing rule and see also obviously industry best practices. So when we talk about ETFs as benchmarks, we're going to use the GIPS standards as kind of the backbone for the conversation, because there is a section in the GIPS standards that talks about this. And what does it look like? What are the requirements that firms have to meet in order to show an ETF as a benchmark? Because ETFs are free. You can get them pretty much anywhere and get the performance. So firms are allowed to use an ETF as a benchmark or a combination of ETFs as benchmarks. There are certain requirements that a firm must meet. We're going to talk about those requirements on the next slide. And a lot of times what we've seen in benchmark changes is once you aren't paying that provider for their benchmark, you can no longer show the benchmark at all. It doesn't matter if it's if you've historically paid for it, you're just not allowed to show it at all. So if you're making a retroactive benchmark change, you do have to disclose the date and description of the change. And then the disclosure must be included in the GIPS report for a minimum of a year. Again, if you're not currently claiming compliance with the GIPS standards, I would tell you this is probably considered industry best practice and you should be doing it anyways. Is it required? No. Is it best practice? Yes, I would say that. So here are some of the requirements to present ETFs as a benchmark. And these are directly from the GIPS Standards Handbook. We thought that was more beneficial than, retyping it and maybe putting it into different language. But basically, if your ETF returns are gross or net of fees, you need to disclose that. You need to disclose the ETF expense ratio if net returns are presented. And if ETF returns are based on market prices or net asset values, that's something that the GIPS standards has deemed important. And then the timing of market close used to determine ETF valuations. If that's wildly different, I think that needs to be disclosed. And if you're presenting those ETF returns as gross or net of withholding taxes, and if the information is available. So also if the firm presents composite gross of fee returns, it should present ETF returns that are grossed up, but it's not required to do so. And I think just for clarification, if your firm, which no one is doing this anymore, this was written pre new marketing rule. If your firm was presenting gross only, then what they're saying is ETF returns should also be gross. This isn't true for any SEC registered advisor anymore. So I think all ETF returns should be net to be more comparative. And then we also have a sample disclosure from the handbook as well. So if you have questions about that, please let us know. This question continues to come up. Attribution. We talked about this on our last webinar, but again, it surfaces whenever we're talking about the new marketing rule. So basically, one of the questions we got was a few firms are removing attribution pages from their marketing materials as it's difficult to calculate net performance for attribution. What are we advising our clients on? And right now, we are advising clients document and defend. So document what you're doing, be prepared to defend it, and basically know what you're doing and why you're doing it. I think where the SEC is going to get people in a gotcha moment is those that haven't evaluated why they're doing what they're doing and they're not documenting that information. And keep in mind too, you have to plan for what if someone leaves the firm. So this whole idea of institutional knowledge being with only one person or only the CCO or only the marketing, the head of marketing, that needs to come to an end. I think with this new marketing rule, you definitely have to have policies and procedures in place to ensure that whoever comes after you will be able to defend what was done at the time and why it was done. As far as how are firms interpreting the latest SEC FAQ as it relates to various types of attribution presented in advertising, this is really related to that FAQ that came out in January and talking about deal level net performance. We go back to, there's this concept at the GIPS conference last year called, they kept repeating, the SEC, the woman that was there from the SEC kept repeating, what could the client expect to take home? And so if attribution being presented represents what the client could expect to take home, then that attribution needs to be calculated using the net performance. And so on the next slide, we just have a couple of examples of what some of those what attribution could be considered performance and should be calculated using net returns. I think without a doubt, max and min drawdowns compared to a benchmark, that that does represent performance. So that needs to be done using your net composite performance. Alpha, relative returns, excess returns, those all represent what a client could expect to take home. As far as attribution that would not be considered performance, could be calculated using gross returns, Sharpe ratio, Sortino, information ratio. Those all have standard deviation in them. So it's less likely to be representative of what a client could expect to take home and is more representative of the attribution of the performance. So I think, just again, it goes back to document and defend. Know why you're doing it and what you're doing, because you won't be able to, if you can't explain it, you can't defend it. And then we got a question about ESG, so we thought we'd throw it in here. And what should we be looking to be able to provide in an SEC review regarding ESG, and have any of our other clients been tasked with providing this type of information to the SEC? Currently, we don't have any clients that have been asked regarding ESG information, but again, it goes back to document and defend. Any information included in marketing materials needs to have a reason to be included, other than it helps our performance or offering look better. That's not a good excuse. It should have significance to the overall presentation and follow the 7 general prohibitions of the marketing rule. So again, I really think just know what you're doing and why you're doing it. And then last question here, will there be any changes to the gift standards in light of the new marketing rule? We have not heard of any, but as firms continue to grapple with some of the differentiations between the two, we expect that there might be a Q&A here or there that'll come more in alignment with the GIP standards, or the GIP standards will become more in alignment with the new marketing rule. I also wouldn't expect another rewrite until 2030 at the earliest. Every single time they go through a rewrite, it's a really big process. And I think Karen Vincent herself said, I am going to be retired by 2030 because I'm not going through another rewrite. She's been through all of them, I think. So we'll see, more to come on that. But for right now, I think they're going to answer things in the form of Q&As. And there are a couple of guidance statements in the works that I know of, but they haven't been released for comment yet. So some of that, I think, it applies to alternatives. So for most of you, it really won't touch you, but there are some things in the works with the GIP standards, and we'll just have to wait and see. And so with that is what we had today for our presentation. But we also want to spend any time that you all have or want to ask us questions about. And if you have none, that's okay too. We're happy to stay on for a couple of extra minutes for anybody that wants to ask a question. Michael, I saw you unmuted. If you want to.
I was actually kind of curious if you would just send that presentation out after the meeting, if that's okay.
Yeah, so we'll send the presentation, we'll send the slides and the recording early next week.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we will. We put it up on YouTube, so it's available for anybody to review, and you're welcome to share it with anybody. All of our presentations for the quarterly review roundtables have been posted to YouTube now on our YouTube channel, so feel free to share those.
Hey Janice, I have a question.
Hi, Kathleen.
Hi. I didn't ask this question, but should have. We've been talking about we got the renewal for our benchmark and the price went way up, and just seeing where their options are. And I know we use ETFs as benchmarks for our wealth management strategies, but we don't really market those. If we did switch to an ETF, there aren't any. You can just take the performance, or any licensing issues or anything we should be concerned about?
Not that we've heard of.
Yeah. dug
ETFs,
around a little and didn't see anything, but was kind of
Right.
nervous about that.
yeah, I mean, ETF seemingly that information is very public, and I haven't heard of anybody having licensing issues.
Do you
But-
know anyone of any firms that have switched to ETFs?
Yeah, we have another firm that switched to ETFs as benchmarks, and they just switched. Like, as far as I know, they're not paying anyone for them.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for joining this webinar with Verity Larsen and Janice Kitzman. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us at the information on the screen. We'd love to hear from you and help in any way we can. We hope you have a great day.